At 2:17 a.m., I opened a folder I was never meant to see and found my husband and my best friend living a secret life inside my own studio. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just remembered everything. And that was the moment everything changed. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. I sat alone in the dim glow of my studio at 2:17 a.m., the sound of crashing waves faint through the open window. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I edited the final wedding gallery of the week. One last folder to check. I clicked on private. The screen filled with images I never should have seen. Hundreds of them. Marcus and Lila, my husband, and my best friend. Laughing, kissing, wrapped in each other's arms right here, in this very studio. On afternoons, I thought they were meeting clients. 14 months of stolen moments captured in crisp, merciless detail. My breath caught somewhere in my throat. The mouse slipped from my hand and clattered onto the desk. I stared at the timestamp on the most recent photo, taken just last Tuesday, while I was driving Sage to preschool. My stomach twisted so violently, I thought I might be sick. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't one weeknight. This was a whole secret life built inside the walls I helped create. I don't remember how long I sat there. Minutes? Hours? All I know is that when I finally stood up, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I forwarded every single photo to my private email with a single, trembling click. By sunrise, the truth had burned itself into my bones. The next morning, I printed everything. I laid the photos across the long oak table in our studio like evidence at a crime scene. Marcus walked in first, still carrying the scent of his morning coffee. When his eyes landed on the images, his face drained of color. Lila arrived moments later, laughing about something on her phone, until she saw the table. Her smile froze and shattered. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in front of them. I simply asked one quiet question. How long? Marcus looked at Lila, then back at me. 14 months, he said, his voice strangely calm. We didn't plan for it to happen, but it did. Lila's eyes filled with tears. Ivy, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Before I could respond, the door opened again. Vivian and Grant Langford, Marcus's parents, walked in, followed by my younger brother Jasper. Marcus had called them on his way over. Of course he had. I watched in stunned silence as the people I once called family looked at the photos, then looked at me, and chose him. Vivian placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. This is devastating for everyone, she said softly. But we have to think about the studio. If you two separate now, everything collapses. Marcus is the one who brings in the corporate clients. Grant nodded, arms crossed. These things happen in marriages. People make mistakes. We need to be practical. Jasper wouldn't even meet my eyes. He just stared at the floor and muttered, Sis, maybe you should calm down first. Think about Sage. Calm down. The words landed like ice water on raw skin. I stood there, surrounded by the people who were supposed to love me most, and realized with horrifying clarity that I had already lost more than my marriage. I had lost my family too. That afternoon, the rain came down in sheets. I drove along the empty coastal road with no destination in mind. The wipers fought uselessly against the downpour. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the rain that streaked the windshield. Every wave crashing against the rocks below seemed to echo the same question inside my chest. How could the two people I trusted most turn my own studio, my safe place, my dream, into the setting of my worst nightmare? How could my own brother, my own in-laws, look at proof of betrayal and still stand on the other side? I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Somewhere between the pain and the fury, a colder feeling began to settle in. This wasn't just heartbreak, this was war. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I wanted to be the good girl who stayed quiet anymore. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about what happens when the people closest to you choose comfort over truth, and how one woman found the strength to rebuild her life from the ashes they left behind. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't loud, it's simply refusing to stay broken. The divorce was quiet. Almost too quiet. I signed the papers without a fight. Gave up most of my share of the studio just to be free. Marcus kept the main building, the big clients, and the name everyone already knew. I walked away with a small back room, the dark room, and the tiny apartment above it. That was enough. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Every night after Sage fell asleep, I carried her upstairs to the little apartment that smelled of fresh paint and salt air. She was only 3, still asking for her daddy sometimes in her sleep. I would hold her tighter, press my face into her soft hair, and whisper that everything would be okay, even when I wasn't sure I believed it. Downstairs, the studio became my whole world. During the day, I smiled for clients. At night, when the lights were off and the ocean roared outside, the silence pressed in. I would sit alone in the dark room, the red safety light glowing softly, developing prints I didn't even need. Tears would fall onto the trays before I could stop them. I cried for the marriage I thought I had. I cried for the best friend who had become a stranger. I cried because some mornings I still reached for the side of the bed that was now empty. But I never cried where Sage could see. Quinn Harlow stayed, my quiet, loyal assistant who had been with me since the early days. She never asked for a raise, never mentioned the nights she worked for free. She simply showed up every morning with 2 cups of coffee and said, "We're still here, Ivy. That's what matters." Then Eleanor Tate walked back into my life. She was 71, sharp-eyed, and richer than most people in town. I had photographed her golden anniversary 3 years earlier. One afternoon, she appeared at the studio door carrying a small leather notebook and an expression that said she had seen enough of life to know real pain when she saw it. "I heard what happened," she said simply. Then she sat down across from me and spoke words I desperately needed to hear. "You built this place with your eye and your heart, Ivy. Don't let them take that from you too." Week after week, Eleanor taught me things no one else had. How to read a profit and loss statement. How to price my work without apologizing. How to speak about my art like it still mattered. She became the grandmother Sage never had, bringing cookies and stories that made my little girl laugh again. And then there was Riley Kane, 22 years old, all nervous energy and quiet determination. She had started as an intern months before everything fell apart. When most of the team left with Marcus, Riley chose to stay. "I watched you work when no one was looking," she told me one evening. "You didn't give up. I don't want to either." Some nights the fear still came. I would stand at the window of the apartment, looking down at the dark studio below, wondering if I was fooling myself. Could a woman with a broken heart and a 3-year-old really rebuild something from almost nothing? The doubt felt heavy. It sat on my chest like wet sand. But every morning I woke up anyway. I edited photos until my eyes burned. I answered emails with hands that still sometimes trembled. I learned to say no to clients who wanted me to work for less than I was worth. Slowly, painfully, I began to stand a little straighter. One cold November evening, long after Sage had gone to bed, I finished editing a wedding gallery. It was the first complete set that carried only my name. No Marcus, no shared studio logo, just Ivy Langford. I walked downstairs into the studio, opened the big sliding door that faced the ocean, and let the cold sea wind rush in. The moon hung low over the water, painting silver across the waves. I stood there for a long time, holding the printed cover sheet in my hands. Then I whispered into the night, "I'm not the one who gets erased anymore." The words felt small, but they felt true. For the first time in many months, something warm flickered inside my chest. Not hope yet, not quite, but the beginning of something that refused to stay broken. 2 years had passed since the night I stood in the dark room crying over wet prints. The studio was no longer just a place to survive. It had begun to breathe again. Word had spread quietly at first, then louder, thanks in large part to Eleanor Tate. She told her wealthy friends about the photographer who refused to disappear. Soon, brides from Portland and Seattle were driving down the coast, asking specifically for Ivy Langford, the one who captured love that felt honest, not perfect. I was busy, but I was also scared. Scared that any moment the fragile life I had rebuilt could crack again. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, a tall man with quiet eyes walked into the studio carrying blueprints under his arm. Theo Whitaker. He was an architect hired to design a new luxury resort just north of town. He needed photographs for the proposal, images that showed the soul of the Oregon coast. We spoke for over an hour that first meeting. He didn't flirt, he didn't push. He simply listened when I explained my vision for the shots, nodding slowly like my words mattered. Weeks turned into months. Theo began stopping by more often, sometimes with small excuses. A question about lighting, a suggestion for a location. Other times he brought coffee and sat on the worn leather couch while Sage played with blocks on the floor. Sage was the first to let him in. One evening, after he helped her build a tower that reached her waist, she looked up at him with those big, curious eyes and asked, "Are you coming back tomorrow, Daddy Theo?" The name hung in the air. I froze. Theo's face softened in a way I had never seen before. He glanced at me, searching for permission, then knelt down to her level and said gently, "I'd like that very much, sweetheart." My heart clenched so tightly I had to turn away for a moment. It wasn't fast. It wasn't fireworks. It was slow mornings where he brought breakfast and helped Sage with her shoes. It was evenings when he stayed late, quietly fixing the loose railing on the studio stairs so I wouldn't worry about her falling. It was the way he never asked me to forget my past, only to let him be part of my present. For the first time in years, I felt seen without being pitied. Jasper started appearing too. At first it was awkward. My little brother would show up with awkward excuses, just passing by. But I could see the guilt in his eyes. He watched me work with clients, saw the way Riley looked up to me, noticed how Sage laughed freely again. One quiet afternoon, he finally spoke. "I was wrong, Ivy," he said, voice rough. "I should have stood by you that day. I was scared of rocking the boat. But I see now what it cost you." I didn't forgive him right away. Some wounds take time, but I let him stay. I let him help carry equipment. I let him be part of Sage's life again, little by little. The studio had become more than a workplace. It was a place of healing. Riley would stay late some nights, watching me edit with quiet admiration. One evening she said softly, "You make me believe I don't have to be perfect to be strong." I smiled at her and replied, "None of us are perfect, Riley. We're just learning how to keep going." And then there were the nights with Theo. We walked the beach at sunset, Sage running ahead collecting shells. He never rushed me. When old memories surfaced and made me quiet, he simply took my hand and waited until I was ready to speak again. One golden evening, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Theo stopped walking. He turned to me, brushed a strand of hair from my face, and said, "I love the woman you are becoming, Ivy. Not despite what happened, but because of how you chose to rise." I looked at him, really looked, and felt something warm and terrifying bloom in my chest. For the first time since that awful night in the studio, I smiled. A real smile, not forced, not polite, just mine. Sage ran back to us, grabbing Theo's hand with her sandy fingers and calling him Daddy Theo again without hesitation. As we walked back toward the studio, the sky painted in soft pinks and oranges, I felt peace, but not complete peace. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a shadow still lingered. The past wasn't gone, it was simply waiting. 3 years had slipped by since the evening I first smiled again on that sunset beach. My studio was no longer fighting to survive. It had become known. Word traveled through the Pacific Northwest wedding circles, quiet, respectful whispers about the photographer who told honest stories with light and shadow. Eleanor Tate had opened many doors, and I had learned to walk through them with my head high. Then came the night of the Northwest Wedding Exhibition, the biggest event of the year, generously funded by Eleanor herself. I was invited as the featured speaker. My collection, titled Frames of Resilience, filled an entire wing of the gallery. Large prints told stories of love that had been tested and quietly rebuilt. People moved slowly through the space, reading the small cards beside each image. I stood on stage in a simple black dress, speaking about finding strength after loss, when I felt it. That familiar shift in the air. Marcus and Lila had just walked in. They were representing their new studio, a sleek, modern competitor that had opened less than a year ago. Marcus wore the same confident smile I once knew too well. Lila stayed close to his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm. I finished my talk without missing a beat, but inside, something old and sharp stirred. Later, as the crowd mingled with champagne glasses in hand, Marcus found me near the back wall. "Ivy," he said softly, stepping too close. "I just wanted to say, I'm really proud of what you've built. The way you've come back from everything. It's impressive." His voice carried that familiar warmth, the one he used when he wanted something. I looked at him for a long moment. The man who once broke my world was now standing here, complimenting my survival, while his own new studio was quietly struggling. I could see it in the tension around his eyes, in the way Lila kept glancing nervously toward the exit. "Thank you," I replied calmly. Then I walked away before he could say anything more. That night, after the lights of the gallery had dimmed and most guests had gone home, Quinn stayed behind to help pack up. She was unusually quiet as she scrolled through her tablet, organizing final files. Suddenly, she froze. "Ivy." Her voice was low, almost hesitant. "I was cleaning out some old shared drives from years ago. Look at this." She turned the screen toward me. There they were, detailed sketches and mood boards I had created in the early days of our original studio. My handwritten notes on lighting setups, my ideas for signature framing techniques, even the exact wording I once used for client questionnaires. Marcus and Lila had taken large portions of them and rebranded them as the foundation of their new studio. My stomach tightened, not with the old, crushing pain. This time it was pure, focused anger. They hadn't just taken my husband and my best friend. They had taken pieces of my creative soul and tried to sell them as their own. Theo found me later that evening, sitting on the edge of the studio steps, staring out at the dark ocean. He didn't ask what was wrong right away. He simply sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. "I saw them tonight," he said gently. "Are you okay?" I leaned my head against his shoulder for a moment. "I thought I was past this," I whispered. But seeing them, hearing him speak like nothing ever happened, it brought everything back. Theo stayed silent for a while, then spoke with quiet strength. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore, Ivy. Whatever you decide to do, I'm here." Eleanor called the next morning. She had heard what happened. Her voice was steady, almost fierce. "They built their house on stolen ground, dear. The question is, are you going to let them keep living there?" That night, long after Sage and Theo had fallen asleep upstairs, I stood alone in the studio. The only light came from my laptop screen. I opened old folders I hadn't touched in years. Sketches, emails, early concept boards with my signature still visible in the corners. My hands no longer shook like they once did. Instead, they moved with purpose. I began gathering everything, quietly, carefully, methodically. As the clock passed midnight and the waves continued their steady rhythm outside, I stared at the screen with clear, unwavering eyes. The woman who once drove through the rain crying in her car was gone. In her place stood someone who had learned exactly how much she was worth. And this time, I was done being erased. The decision didn't come in a moment of rage. It came quietly, after many sleepless nights staring at the evidence I had gathered. Eleanor Tate invited me to join her online talk series about building a personal brand with integrity. I accepted. The night of the live broadcast, the studio was dimly lit except for the soft glow of my laptop screen. Hundreds of people had tuned in from across the country. I spoke calmly about my journey, the early struggles, the slow rebuilding, the importance of owning your own voice. Then I clicked to the next slide, a simple before and after presentation. On one side, old photos of our original studio, including several of my early concept boards with my handwritten notes clearly visible. On the other side, nearly identical layouts, color palettes, and client experience flows from Marcus and Lila's new studio. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't name them. I simply said, sometimes the most painful part of starting over is realizing that pieces of your story were taken and reframed by someone else. The silence in the comments was deafening. Then the messages began pouring in. Within hours, the industry was buzzing. Marcus and Lila tried to respond quickly. They posted statements claiming the similarities were coincidences and accused me of being bitter, of trying to destroy their new beginning out of jealousy. Their words felt familiar. But this time, they didn't land the same way. Riley Kane surprised everyone. The quiet 22-year-old who had once been my intern went live on her own small channel the next day. With a steady voice and trembling hands, she spoke about what she had witnessed in the old studio, the late nights, the ideas discussed openly, the way certain creative choices had clearly originated from me. I stayed because I believed in Ivy's vision, she said. I still do. Then Jasper stepped forward. My brother, who had once looked away, recorded a short video and shared it publicly for the first time. I failed my sister when she needed me most, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I watched her build everything from almost nothing while others tried to take credit. She deserves to be heard. The consequences moved faster than I expected. Major clients began canceling contracts with Marcus and Lila's studio. Bookings dried up almost overnight. The polished image they had worked so hard to create started to crack in public view. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Marcus. His voice was different now, strained, almost desperate. Ivy, can we talk? Just the two of us. We can figure this out quietly. There's no need for things to get uglier. I stood in the middle of my studio, looking at the prints hanging on the walls, my walls. I answered softly but clearly. I've learned something important, Marcus. The past doesn't get to define my future anymore. I wish you well, but I'm no longer available for that conversation. I hung up without waiting for a reply. The following weekend, I hosted a small gathering at the studio, just the people who had truly stood with me. Sage ran around in her favorite yellow dress, laughing as Theo chased her gently between the light stands. Quinn brought her famous lemon cake. Riley helped set up the tables with quiet pride. Eleanor sat in the corner chair like a queen, watching everything with soft approval. Even Jasper was there, helping carry chairs, still a little awkward but trying. At the center of the back wall, I hung the largest print of all. It was a single empty frame. Inside it, in elegant white lettering, were the words, "This frame belongs to me now." I stood back and looked at it for a long time. Later that night, when the guests had gone and Sage was fast asleep upstairs, I walked down to the beach with Theo. The sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn. I held Sage's small sleeping form against my chest, her head tucked under my chin. Theo walked beside me, his arm around my shoulders. As the first rays of sunlight touched the water, turning everything gold, I felt something settle deep inside me. Not triumph, not even full forgiveness, just peace. I realized then that real justice wasn't about watching them fall. It was about rising so high that their shadows could no longer reach me. This story is about discovering that the most powerful revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's becoming a version of yourself so strong, so whole, that nothing they took away can ever diminish you again. Because when the people closest to you try to erase your frame, the bravest thing you can do is fill it with a life they could never take. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakened something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you truly. Aviso legal. Disclaimer: all stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.